Captain Jake Morrison pressed his palm against the cold metal wall of the bridge and felt the vibration of the Terra Nova's engines through his bones. The ship had been traveling for 3 months at faster-than-light speed, heading toward the coordinates where their long-range sensors had detected something impossible. The readings showed a massive artificial structure floating in empty space, far larger than anything humans had ever built. Lisa Bennett sat at her communication station, her fingers dancing across the holographic display as she tried to make sense of the signals coming from the structure. The patterns were clearly artificial, but unlike anything in Earth's databases. She turned to look at Jake with wide eyes and spoke in a whisper that somehow felt appropriate for the moment. The signals were not random noise, but organized transmissions. Between multiple sources, Alex Rodriguez stood at the tactical station, his military training making him automatically catalog every detail that might matter in a fight. The structure ahead of them was at least 50 kilometers long and covered in what looked like docking ports and weapon emplacements. More concerning were the smaller objects surrounding it, each one roughly the size of a human destroyer but moving with precision that suggested advanced artificial intelligence. Dr. Helen Carter had spent the last hour analyzing the spectral data from the structure, and the results made her stomach clench with nervous excitement. The materials were not just advanced but seemed to incorporate elements that did not exist in Earth's periodic table. Whatever built this had access to technology that made human science look like cave paintings. The Terra Nova had been humanity's first attempt at deep space exploration after achieving faster-than-light travel just 2 years earlier. Earth's governments had pooled their resources to build the ship and send it toward the most promising stellar formations their telescopes had identified. Finding signs of intelligent life had been the dream, but now that dream felt more like walking into a room full of strangers who might not want visitors. Jake made the decision that would change everything for humanity. He ordered Lisa to broadcast a standard first contact message on all frequencies while Alex powered up the ship's defensive systems. The message was simple and had been crafted by Earth's best linguists and mathematicians to be as universal as possible. It contained mathematical constants, images of humans, and basic information about Earth's location and peaceful intentions. The response came faster than anyone expected. The massive structure suddenly came alive with lights and activity, and dozens of the smaller craft began moving toward the Terra Nova. Lisa's board lit up with incoming transmissions that her computer struggled to decode. But the universal translator that had been humanity's greatest achievement in artificial intelligence began working on the alien language. What appeared on the main screen made the entire bridge crew step backward in shock. The being that looked back at them was clearly artificial, its body made of what appeared to be living crystal that shifted and changed as it spoke. Its voice, when translated, was melodic but carried an undertone that suggested vast intelligence. An even vaster age, the creature identified itself as Zephyr Prime, administrator of what it called Border Station, Epsilon 7. It explained that the Terra Nova had entered space controlled by the Galactic Concordat, a coalition of 12 species that had been sharing the galaxy for over 3,000 years. The station's purpose was to monitor and control access to Concordat space, preventing unauthorized entry by potentially dangerous species. Jake felt his heart sink as Zephyr Prime continued speaking. The Concordat had been aware of humanity for centuries, monitoring Earth's radio transmissions and observing human behavior from a distance. What they had seen had convinced them that humans were too violent and unpredictable to be allowed into the galactic community. The endless wars, the destruction of Earth's environment, and humanity's tendency to solve problems through force had marked them as a threat to galactic peace. Helen tried to argue that humanity had evolved beyond its violent past, that the United Earth government represented a new chapter in human development. But Zephyr Prime simply projected holographic images of recent human conflicts, environmental disasters, and weapons tests that had been observed by Concordat monitoring stations. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. The crystalline being explained that the Concordat's member species had all evolved past their aggressive tendencies before achieving interstellar travel. They were builders, thinkers, and cooperators who had created a civilization based on mutual respect and shared knowledge. Humanity's arrival in space while still carrying the capacity for large-scale violence represented a contamination they could not allow. Alex watched his tactical display as the alien craft took positions around the Terra Nova. Their weapons were clearly far more advanced than anything humanity possessed, but more importantly, they were already powered and aimed. The message was clear without being explicitly stated. Lisa received the final transmission from Zephyr Prime with tears in her eyes. The Terra Nova would be escorted back to the edge of human space and released. A barrier would be established around the Sol system to prevent any further human expansion into the galaxy. Any attempt to breach this barrier would be met with decisive action to protect the peace that the Concordat had maintained for millennia. As the alien escort ships began moving the Terra Nova away from the border station, Jake looked at his crew and saw his own feelings reflected in their faces. Humanity had reached for the stars only to discover that they were not welcome among them. They had arrived late to a party where the other guests had already decided they were too dangerous to invite inside. The journey back to Earth would take 3 months. But Jake knew that the real journey for humanity was just beginning. They had learned that they were not alone in the universe, but they had also learned that being alone might be their permanent condition. The question now was whether humanity would accept this isolation or find a way to prove that they deserved a place among the stars. Admiral Robert Lee stood in the command center of the Emergency Colonial Council, watching the holographic display that showed the energy barrier surrounding the Sol system. 6 months had passed since the Terra Nova returned with news that humanity was trapped in their own star system, and every day brought new reports of failed attempts to breach the alien blockade. The barrier was invisible to the naked eye but deadly effective, disabling any human vessel that came too close and sending automated tugs to drag the ships back into human space. Danny Park wiped sweat from his forehead as he worked on the damaged engine components salvaged from the Terra Nova. His team of engineers had been studying the alien technology for months, trying to understand how the Concordat had disabled their ship so easily. The scorch marks on the hull told a story of energy weapons that could target specific systems without destroying the entire vessel. This precision suggested a level of technological control that humanity was centuries away from achieving. The discovery that changed everything came from an unexpected source. Dr. Kelly Barnes had been analyzing the intercepted communications between Concordat ships, using advanced computer programs to decode their language patterns. What she found made her call an emergency meeting with the council leadership. The alien messages revealed something crucial about their opponents that no one had expected to learn. Kelly stood before the assembled military leaders and government officials, her presentation displaying translated Concordat communications on the main screen. The aliens were not discussing humanity as a military threat, but as a curiosity, like dangerous animals that needed to be contained. Their conversations revealed that none of the 12 Concordat species had ever fought a real war. They had evolved as cooperative species, settling disputes through negotiation and resource sharing rather than violence. Robert felt a chill run down his spine as Kelly explained what this meant. The Concordat had built their entire civilization on the assumption that intelligent beings would choose cooperation over conflict. They had never encountered a species that saw violence as a viable solution to problems. To them, humanity's capacity for warfare was not just dangerous but incomprehensible. The implications became clear when Danny presented his analysis of the Concordat weapon systems. The energy weapons that had disabled the Terra Nova were designed to incapacitate rather than destroy. The aliens had built their military technology around the concept of stopping conflicts rather than winning them. Their ships were heavily shielded against energy attacks but showed no signs of armor designed to stop physical projectiles. Commander Steve Walsh had been quietly developing a plan that he knew would be controversial. As head of Earth's new strategic planning division, he had access to intelligence reports from across the solar system. The barrier around Earth was maintained by a network of automated stations that the Concordat had positioned just outside Pluto's orbit. These stations were designed to detect and disable human ships, but they showed the same technological philosophy as the weapons systems. Steve presented his analysis to the Council with the grim efficiency of a career military officer. The Concordat stations were vulnerable to attack methods that their creators had never considered. Kinetic weapons, nuclear missiles, and even simple explosives could potentially damage or destroy the barrier generators. The aliens had never faced an enemy that would use such primitive but effective weapons. The debate that followed lasted for hours. President Maria Santos argued that attacking the barrier would confirm the Concordat's fears about human aggression. But Robert pointed out that humanity was already trapped and condemned by alien prejudice. They had nothing to lose by proving that their capacity for violence could serve a purpose beyond destruction. Dr. Gary Peterson, head of Earth's Defense Research Division, provided the technical assessment that would influence the final decision. The barrier stations were powerful but not invulnerable. A coordinated attack using multiple ship-mounted railguns could potentially create a gap in the energy field. The risk was enormous because failure would likely result in the complete destruction of the attacking force. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Foster had been monitoring deep space communications when she detected transmissions from beyond the galactic rim. The signals were unlike anything in the Concordat databases, aggressive and demanding in tone. The universal translator struggled with the alien language, but the basic message was clear enough to send shock waves through the emergency council. Something was coming toward Concordat space from the outer galaxy, something that the established civilizations had never encountered before. The transmission spoke of consumption, of converting biological matter into energy, and of a hunger that could never be satisfied. The newcomers called themselves the Devourers, and their messages suggested that they saw the galaxy's inhabitants as nothing more than food. Amy realized that this development could change everything for humanity. If the Concordat faced a threat that their peaceful philosophy could not handle, they might need allies who understood warfare. The galaxy's rejection of human violence might become their salvation if properly timed and presented. Robert made the decision that would define humanity's future relationship with the galaxy. Earth would continue developing weapons and tactics that could breach the barrier, but they would wait for the right moment to act. The Concordat would need to discover their own limitations before they would accept help from a species they considered too dangerous to trust. The waiting began with a mixture of hope and dread. Humanity would prepare for war while hoping that their violent nature might finally serve a purpose that even the peaceful Concordat could appreciate. The question was whether this opportunity would come before Earth's resources were exhausted or the barrier became too strong to breach. The alert came through Earth's Deep Space Monitoring Network at 0347 hours, on a Tuesday that would forever change the balance of power in the galaxy. Ambassador Christylus of the Concordat had been attempting diplomatic contact with the massive ships that had appeared at the edge of their territory 3 days. The floating jellyfish-like being represented everything the Concordat stood for: patience, wisdom, and the absolute belief that any conflict could be resolved through peaceful negotiation. Dr. Gary Peterson stood in the emergency command center, watching the long-range sensor data that his team had intercepted from Concordat communications. The alien ships were unlike anything in their databases, built with organic curves that suggested biological rather than mechanical construction. Each vessel was roughly the size of a small moon, and their energy signatures indicated power sources that dwarfed anything the Concordat had ever fielded. The first transmission from the newcomers had been simple and direct. They identified themselves as the Devourers and stated their purpose with the clarity of absolute certainty. All biological matter in the galaxy would be consumed and converted into energy to fuel their expansion. Resistance was futile because resistance was merely another form of biological matter to be processed. President Maria Santos received the intercepted Concordat communications with a mixture of horror and grim satisfaction. The aliens that had trapped humanity in their home system were about to face something that their philosophy of peaceful coexistence could not handle. The Devourers did not negotiate, did not compromise, and did not recognize the concept of surrender. They simply consumed everything in their path. Ambassador Crystallis had responded to the Devourer ultimatum with the patience of a species that had resolved conflicts through dialogue for thousands of years. The jellyfish-like being transmitted mathematical proofs, cultural exchanges, and offers of mutual cooperation. The Concordat had never met a species that could not be reasoned with, and Crystallis approached the Devourers with the same methods that had worked for millennia. The response came in the form of energy, beams that began systematically dismantling the ambassador's ship. Lieutenant Colonel Amy Foster watched the sensor readings with growing alarm as the Devourer weapons ignored the Concordat's advanced shielding and began converting the ship's hull into raw energy. The process was methodical and efficient, starting with the outer armor and working inward toward the crew compartments. Within 6 hours, Ambassador Crystallis and the entire diplomatic mission had been consumed. The Devourers transmitted a single message to the Concordat leadership. Negotiation was consumption by other means, and they preferred the direct approach. The galaxy's most patient diplomat had become the first casualty in a war that the Concordat did not yet understand they were fighting. The Concordat's response revealed the fundamental weakness in their civilization. Council Leader Harmony 7 called for increased defensive measures and renewed attempts at communication. The 12 species began evacuating their border worlds, while still believing that some form of peaceful resolution could be achieved. Their entire military doctrine was based on deterrence rather than destruction, and they had no experience with an enemy that could not be deterred. Commander Steve Walsh analyzed the Concordat military deployments with the eye of a professional soldier. Their ships were moving to defensive positions around critical systems, but their formations showed no understanding of how to fight an enemy that fed on destruction. The Concordat was preparing to defend their civilization, using tactics designed for conflicts between rational opponents, who shared basic assumptions about the value of life. The first major battle took place in the Kepler 186 system, where a Concordat patrol fleet encountered a Devourer scout group. The engagement lasted 14 minutes and resulted in the complete destruction of the Concordat force. The Devourers did not disable their opponents or try to capture their technology. They simply consumed everything, converting ships, crews, and even the local space stations into energy that made them stronger. Dr. Kelly Barnes studied the battle recordings with the horror of someone who finally understood what humanity was facing. The Devourers were not just another alien species with different values. They were the ultimate expression of survival through consumption, evolved beyond any concept of cooperation or coexistence. They represented everything the Concordat had tried to evolve away from, magnified into a force that could devour galaxies. The reports that followed painted a picture of systematic destruction across 17 Concordat worlds. The Devourers moved through space like a cosmic plague, consuming planets and converting their biospheres into energy. They left behind dead worlds stripped of all organic matter, their surfaces scarred by the massive energy extraction machines that followed in the wake of their fleets. Admiral Robert Lee received intelligence reports that confirmed his worst fears. The Concordat military was collapsing under the weight of an enemy they could not understand. Their energy weapons were useless against ships that absorbed energy for fuel. Their defensive strategies assumed rational opponents who could be deterred through strength, but the Devourers saw strength as just another form of nourishment. The breakthrough moment came when President Santos realized that the galaxy's greatest civilization was about to fall to an enemy that shared humanity's capacity for violence, but none of their restraint. The Devourers were what the Concordat had always feared humans might become, a species that solved problems through absolute destruction. The irony was perfect and terrifying. As the emergency session of Earth's leadership concluded, everyone in the room understood that the balance of power in the galaxy was about to shift. The Concordat had rejected humanity for being too violent, but now they faced an enemy that made human warfare look like a children's game. The question was whether humanity would help their captors or watch the galaxy burn from behind their energy prison. The energy barrier around Earth's solar system flickered and died on a morning that felt like dawn after the longest night in human history. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the newly constructed battleship Retribution, watching the alien border station that had once been humanity's prison become their doorway to salvation. The same crystalline being that had condemned them to isolation now waited to welcome them as the galaxy's last hope behind the Retribution. A fleet of 27 human warships held position at the edge of the system. Each vessel had been retrofitted with weapons that the Concordat had never seen before. Railguns that could punch through armor at relativistic speeds, nuclear missiles that could crack moons, and kinetic bombardment systems that turned simple mass into devastating weapons. The ships looked crude compared to the elegant curves of Concordat vessels, but they carried the promise of violence that the galaxy desperately needed. Zephyr Prime's crystalline form seemed smaller than Jake remembered, its internal light dimmed by the weight of watching civilizations die. The border station administrator had spent the last month sending increasingly desperate messages to Earth, each one more humble than the last. The Devourers had consumed 43 worlds and were advancing toward the Concordat's core systems, at a rate that made surrender seem like the only logical choice. The holographic display in the station's main chamber showed the scope of the disaster with clinical precision. Red markers indicated consumed worlds, yellow showed systems under attack, and green represented the shrinking islands of Concordat territory that still remained. The pattern was clear and terrifying. The Devourers were not just winning the war, but consuming it, growing stronger with each victory. Dr. Rachel King had been chosen to lead humanity's diplomatic mission, because she understood both the science of war and the psychology of defeat. She sat across from a council of alien representatives who had once considered her species too dangerous to exist. Now these same beings looked at her, with the desperate hope of creatures who had run out of options and time. The Vorthan representative, a being that resembled a living plant with multiple faces, spoke first. Its species had been the first to encounter the Devourers and had watched their homeworld consumed in a matter of hours. The energy absorption technology that the Devourers used rendered all conventional weapons useless, turning every shot fired at them into fuel for their advance. Commander Tony Miller listened to the tactical briefings with the professional interest of someone who had spent his career studying how to kill efficiently. The Concordat military doctrine was built around the concept of minimum necessary force, using just enough violence to achieve objectives without causing unnecessary harm, against an enemy that fed on energy and grew stronger through conflict. This approach was not just ineffective but actively harmful. The crystalline being that had once been humanity's jailer now begged for their help with the dignity of a species facing extinction. Zephyr Prime explained that the Concordat had tried everything their technology could offer. They had built larger energy weapons, created more powerful shields, and even attempted to negotiate with individual Devourer commanders. Nothing had worked because nothing in their experience had prepared them for an enemy that saw destruction as nourishment. Rachel presented humanity's terms with the calm precision of someone who held all the cards in a game where the stakes were galactic civilization. Full membership in the Concordat would be granted immediately, along with access to their advanced technology and trade networks. Human colonies would be established on suitable worlds, and Earth would be given a voice in galactic policy equal to any other member species. The price for this partnership was simple: humanity would lead the military response against the Devourers. Human tactics, human weapons, and human willingness to accept casualties would be the foundation of the galaxy's defense. The Concordat species would provide support, resources, and their advanced technology, but they would follow human military leadership. The debate that followed revealed the depth of the Concordat's desperation. Some representatives argued that accepting human help would fundamentally change their civilization, turning them into something they had evolved beyond. Others pointed out that without human intervention, there would be no civilization left to preserve. The vote was close, but survival instinct proved stronger than philosophical principle. Jake watched the alien representative sign the agreement. with ceremonial implements that had once been used to welcome new species into the galactic community. The irony was not lost on him that humanity was joining this community through the threat of violence rather than despite it. They had been rejected for their capacity to make war, and now they were being embraced for exactly the same reason. The first joint briefing revealed the scope of the challenge ahead. The Devourers had established a beachhead in the Andromeda Arm and were consuming systems faster than the Concordat could evacuate them. Their technology was not just advanced, but alien in ways that made human science look primitive. They did not build ships so much as grow them from consumed matter, creating vessels that adapted to threats in real time. Tony presented the human analysis of Devourer weaknesses with the confidence of someone who had studied every form of warfare in human history. The aliens were vulnerable to kinetic weapons because they had evolved to absorb energy rather than resist physical force. Their ships were built for consumption rather than combat, making them vulnerable to attacks that destroyed rather than disabled. The meeting ended with the activation of joint communication channels between Earth and the Concordat fleet. For the first time in human history, their species was not alone in space. They had allies, resources, and a purpose that went beyond survival. The galaxy had rejected them as too violent, but now that same violence might be the key to saving everything the Concordat had built over millennia of peaceful cooperation. The first battle between humanity and the Devourers took place in the Kepler 442 system, where a massive alien fleet had cornered 3 million Concordat refugees on a dying world. Admiral Jake Morrison watched the tactical display from the bridge of the Retribution as his mixed fleet of human and alien vessels approached the system at maximum speed. The Devourers had been systematically consuming the planet's biosphere for 6 days, their energy extraction machines turning forests into fuel and oceans into power cells. Colonel Sam Hughes led the first wave of human fighters toward the Devourer. Ships with the cold efficiency of someone who had trained his entire life for this moment. The alien vessels were unlike anything in human military doctrine, their organic curves suggesting that they had been grown rather than built. Each ship pulsed with absorbed energy, their hulls glowing with the life force of consumed worlds. The Concordat evacuation fleet hung in space like sitting ducks, their massive transport ships too slow to escape and too lightly armed to fight. Captain Ellen Davis watched from her position aboard the rescue vessel New Hope as Devourer energy beams began systematically draining power from the Concordat ships. The aliens were not trying to destroy the evacuation fleet, but to consume it. Slowly, savoring the process of turning hope into despair, Sam's fighter squadron approached the enemy formation using tactics that would have been impossible with energy weapons. Instead of trying to match the Devourer's power output, the human pilots targeted specific structural points with armor-piercing rounds fired from electromagnetic railguns. The kinetic projectiles traveled at nearly light speed, carrying enough momentum to punch through alien hulls that had been designed to absorb energy rather than resist physical force. The first Devourer ship to fall was a scout vessel that had been feeding on the planet's atmosphere. Sam's wingman, Lieutenant Paul Green, put 3 railgun rounds through its central processing core before the alien crew understood what was happening. The ship did not explode but simply stopped functioning, its organic systems shutting down. As vital components were physically destroyed, Major Linda Clark commanded the ground forces that landed on the planet's surface to protect the remaining refugee camps. Her troops carried weapons that the Concordat had abandoned centuries ago: chemical explosives, flamethrowers, and projectile weapons that relied on simple physics rather than advanced energy manipulation. The Devourers had never faced enemies who fought with such primitive but effective tools. The battle on the surface revealed the true nature of the enemy humanity faced. The Devourers were not just consuming the planet but transforming it, their technology converting organic matter into something that could think and move with purpose. Trees became walking weapons, rivers turned into flowing energy conduits, and even the air itself began to pulse with hostile intelligence. Linda's Marines fought through a landscape that actively tried to kill them, using thermite charges to burn through alien biomachinery and high-explosive rounds to destroy energy collection nodes. The Devourers had expected to face energy weapons that they could absorb and redirect, but they had no defense against soldiers who were willing to use fire and metal to solve problems. The turning point came when Captain Peter Wright made a decision that shocked both his human crew and their Concordat allies. His ship, the Defiance, had taken heavy damage from Devourer energy beams and was losing power rapidly. Instead of retreating, Peter ordered his crew to abandon ship and then rammed the vessel directly into the largest Devourer mothership at maximum velocity. The impact was devastating in its simplicity. The Defiance struck the alien vessel with the force of a small asteroid, its kinetic energy punching through organic armor that could absorb the output of entire star systems. The mothership began to break apart, its biomechanical systems failing as physical trauma overwhelmed its ability to process and redirect energy. Jake watched from the retribution as the tide of battle shifted in humanity's favor. The Devourers had built their entire military strategy around the assumption that their enemies would use energy weapons that could be absorbed and converted. They had never considered that an intelligent species might choose to fight with kinetic force. Chemical reactions and nuclear explosions. The evacuation of the refugee camps proceeded under the cover of human weapons fire. Commander Nancy Lewis coordinated the rescue operation with the efficiency of someone who understood that every second meant lives saved or lost. The Concordat transports, protected by human fighters and supported by human ground forces, began lifting the survivors from a world that was dying by degrees. The final phase of the battle demonstrated why humanity had been feared by the Concordat in the first place. Colonel Hughes led a bombing run against the Devourer extraction facilities using nuclear weapons that had been banned by galactic law for over 1,000 years. The explosions turned the alien machinery into radioactive slag, their energy absorption systems overloaded by the sheer violence of atomic fission. As the last Devourer ship fled the system, leaving behind a planet scarred but still capable of supporting life, Jake realized that humanity had found its place in the galaxy. They were not diplomats or philosophers, but warriors who could face enemies that others could not comprehend. The Concordat had rejected them for their capacity for violence, but now that same violence had saved 3 million lives. The victory at Kepler 442 was transmitted across Concordat space within hours, carrying a message that changed everything about how the galaxy viewed humanity. The species that had been too dangerous to welcome had become the shield that protected those who could not protect themselves. The war was far from over, but for the first time since the Devourers had appeared, the galaxy had hope. 3 years had passed since the last Devourer ship fled beyond the galactic rim, leaving behind a galaxy forever changed by war and the species that had saved it. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of Concordat Station Prime, watching a fleet of mixed human and alien vessels conduct joint training exercises in the space around the galaxy's capital world. The sight would have been impossible to imagine when humanity first encountered the border station, but now it represented the new reality of galactic civilization. The war against the Devourers had ended not with a single decisive battle, but with a systematic campaign that pushed the invaders back system by system. Human tactics and weapons had proven devastatingly effective against an enemy that had evolved to consume energy rather than resist physical force. Nuclear weapons, kinetic bombardment, and simple chemical explosives had broken the back of a force that had seemed unstoppable to the Concordat's energy-based military. Dr. Jennifer Cole walked through the corridors of the Cultural Exchange Center, observing classes where human children learned alongside young aliens whose species had once considered humanity too dangerous to exist. The integration had not been easy, but necessity had forced cooperation that had gradually become genuine friendship. Human teachers showed Concordat students the principles of defensive strategy, while alien instructors taught humans about technologies that seemed like magic. The changes went deeper than military cooperation. Commander Nancy Lewis had spent the last year establishing joint colonies where humans and aliens worked together to rebuild worlds damaged by the Devourer invasion. The human approach to problem-solving through direct action complemented the Concordat's patient wisdom in ways that neither species had expected. Together, they were accomplishing things that had been impossible for either group alone. Not everything had gone smoothly during the integration process. Captain Ron Davis had been forced to court-martial several human officers for using excessive force during peacekeeping missions in systems still recovering from Devourer attacks. The line between necessary aggression and needless brutality remained difficult for humanity to navigate, especially when their alien allies could not understand the distinction between controlled violence and random destruction. The incident that had tested the partnership most severely occurred during the liberation of the Vega system, where Devourer remnants had taken hostages from 3 different Concordat species. Lieutenant Mike Foster had led a rescue mission that saved all the hostages but resulted in the complete destruction of the alien facility and everyone inside it. The Concordat representatives had been horrified by the human willingness to sacrifice enemy lives to save friendly ones, but these growing pains were overshadowed by the larger success of the Alliance. The galaxy was safer than it had been in generations, with human patrol fleets maintaining security along trade routes that had been abandoned during the Devourer crisis. The same capacity for violence that had once made humanity unwelcome now made them indispensable as guardians of galactic peace. Jake reflected on the irony of their situation as he watched human and alien crews working together to maintain their ships. Humanity had been rejected from the galactic community because of their aggressive nature, but that same aggression had saved the community when it faced extinction. The Concordat had learned that violence properly directed could serve peaceful ends, while humans had discovered that their strength meant nothing without something worth protecting. The transformation was visible in every aspect of galactic society. Captain Lisa Bennett now commanded a mixed crew aboard the exploration vessel Unity, leading joint missions to investigate systems that had been abandoned during the war. Her ship carried both human weapons and Concordat technology, representing the merger of 2 very different approaches to exploring the unknown. The Devourer threat had not been completely eliminated but contained. Long-range sensors still detected their ships operating beyond the galactic rim, but they no longer approached Concordat space. The lesson of Kepler 442 and a dozen other battles had taught them that this galaxy contained predators who could not be consumed. Humanity had become the immune system that protected galactic civilization from threats it could not handle alone. Dr. Rachel King continued her work as humanity's chief diplomat, but her role had evolved beyond simple negotiation. She now helped mediate disputes between Concordat species who had learned to appreciate human directness in solving problems that had festered for centuries. The human approach of addressing conflicts through action rather than endless discussion had revolutionized galactic politics. The memorial wall in the station's central plaza honored the humans who had died fighting the Devourers, their names carved in materials from dozens of worlds they had helped save. Captain Peter Wright's sacrifice aboard the Defiance was remembered alongside thousands of others who had chosen to face impossible odds rather than accept defeat. Their deaths had meaning because they had preserved something larger than themselves. Admiral Morrison looked out at the stars and saw a future that neither humanity nor the Concordat could have achieved alone. The galaxy had initially rejected humans for being too violent, but now they served as protectors for species who had forgotten how to fight. The partnership worked because both sides had learned to value what the other offered. Humanity had arrived late to the galactic community, armed with weapons and attitudes that seemed primitive to advanced civilizations. But when those civilizations faced extinction, human violence had become their salvation. The species that had been unwelcome because of their capacity for war had found their place as guardians of peace through strength. The galaxy was safer because humans had brought their weapons to the stars and learned to use them in service of something greater than conquest.